Hi, Bert. Thank you very much for coming to this Value Creation in Life Sciences series. I very much look forward to talk on the topic corporate governance, board meeting, and investing as well. Before we start, maybe would you like to give a short introduction to the audience?
I'm Bert Junno. I worked in several areas. I started out as an engineer in physics, and then continued on to study electronics and semiconductor engineering and tool building for semiconductor production. So I have a PhD in semiconductor physics and electronics. And I went on to with further science at Generalists University. I got recruited to a startup in making tools for production tools for semiconductor production or electronics production. And that was the first startup I was part of. And so that was a learning curve. That was 1998. After that, I've been part of several others in electronics, semiconductors, IT, medtech. But in 2008, I was charged with the task of monetizing on it was a fund. It was a government fund, a Swedish government fund called Forska Patent, and they held several patent families that needed, of course, large costs as they were going into the stages of country development of the patent or the IP, and the owners, that was the Swedish government, they wanted to divest of all these assets, and the assets in tech, IT, telecom, semiconductors, electronics, medtech, all the tech. I understood that, so I could divest a large part of that to give some income to the stakeholders. The problem was 80% was biotech. Mm-hmm. And I knew absolutely nothing about biotech at that point. That was actually 2006 when I started with the fund, but 2008 I took over as a CEO. And that was when I founded the first biotech company. Vint Research is still around, it's in oncology. I tried to hire a CEO to take over the role. I found it, so I was kind of founding CEO, but I was more technical because I knew how to do all those technical things. Nobody wanted to have a job. I said, you get founder shares. I mean, you get a salary every month. I always too insecure. Mind you, this was just at the time of the Lehman Brothers crash, 2008. Right. So we were kind of looking after their academic jobs or whatever they had in other sectors and areas. So I had to soldier on for 4 years. And then the initial guy I asked first, he asked me, is this job still around after 4 years? So he came back because, actually he took it over. So that was fine. But after that, I continued. But also during that time, I developed several other assets towards incorporation, development. So I founded several other companies such as Galecto, Aptahem, Gabater. I mean, there are some other examples, but those are companies that are still around in different formats. And right. At the same time, of course, I had private interests also. So I decided to go in the direction of biotech, and I started to source technologies and to found new companies, such as Cyxone, and now more later Bimelius Pharma, but there have, of course, been others along the road. But now I'm still active with several new startups, but I'm kind of coming back to roots again with semiconductors. So one of the new projects I'm working on now is actually in the semiconductor field, but might be health tech related. The other is IT, which is in now with artificial intelligence and all of this. It is quite progressed, and all of these have the stakeholders again. So you have at least 10 people for each project. Third one,
Right.
I cannot say yet because I'm negotiating tomorrow on that one. So I might have to come back on that, but I would be pharmaceutical.
Perfect. Super. Thank you very much. So, of course, this topic that we are supposed to discuss today gets into corporate governance, board meetings, and so on. But before that, given that you gave your introduction, where you said that you had initial degree in physics and then you work in semiconductor, I was just thinking that in these times when the world is more interconnected, more complex, right? Do you think that this multidisciplinary skills, right, right from knowledge of different areas, has actually helped you to make decisions better? What I'm trying to say is that if we go back and if you were if you had done something in biology and got some degree and PhD in this one, and then right now you were running a biotech company, CEO, how would that thinking process you be different compared to what you have right now?
Actually, I had an interest in the medical field already as a student because I worked in hospital on the side to fund my studies.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked for 3 years in mental hospital as an auditor, and I was very intrigued and interested in that as it was, and I learned a lot from that. And working with people, that was a great experience. And also a learning curve, knowing that the human scope is huge. The possibilities in all directions, they are much bigger than you maybe learn at school or learning by your parents. They want to be perfect, in a cube, but the possibilities are so much bigger. So I think that was one very important part. The other things, when I was a student of physics, I had an American guy who was my supervisor, Mark. He said, okay, this kind of invention of ours, we're working towards that. It could be a satellite antenna. And even if I worked in these applied sciences, semiconductors in Europe, you didn't think like that. You didn't think like in the US. He said, okay, then what the fuck, why a satellite antenna? What do you think? Yeah, we have to make some money, And I said, okay. So that was kind of an eye-opener and also thought opener for me. That was really a revelatory experience and situation. So, okay, that was an important point. And then, of course, when a friend called me at Chalmers when I was working there, and he said, okay, we're founding this new company and it's in electronics. Do you want to take part? Oh, no, I'm not interested. Oh, you will be a shareholder. And then I said, like these guys, I tried to recruit for the oncology company, who said, okay, you get shares, founder shares. I'm not interested in shares. What about the salary? So, so it's kind of a learning curve in some ways. I mean, I think one should actually try to teach people, young people in school quite early on, at least the people who are, who would take it in some way. I know that everybody are geared towards this, but at least one should open their minds that there are some things that you can do, and at all levels, from at least from middle school and up, to know some things about business and economy and so on. I think that's underrated in today's school, unfortunately, in many countries.
Right. So let's start with the main questions on board and so on. So you have been, I see that you are the chairman of the board for 3 companies, if I'm correct. Saxon,
yeah, I'm kind of changing that now because I'm starting a new company. So I'm actually, that was last week, I exited one of them. That was Combogene.
Okay.
So I resigned, and I'm going down from chairman to chair member tomorrow in Saxa. remain chairman in Aptaham. The problem in some of these companies, the chairmanship takes a lot of time. And I might have to step up and be a CEO or something like that in some of these new startups, at least initially, as I know from experience. And then I won't have any time for being any chairman or something like that. Every time you have this situation of quarterly reports with listed, they're all listed companies. They collide. It's the same time of the year, sometimes even the same day. It's very difficult to make it happen. So I planned for the next step. It's after the pandemic. Now it's time to do something new.
Exactly. So I think you partially answered my question, because I was about to ask you that what are the things that you as a chairman of the board do not like about, So one thing, of course, you talked about the time, but apart from that, do you have any other interesting things to share that you do not like being the chairman of the board?
Yeah, you have to be on time. Which is difficult if you have too many other jobs, or it was actually a good thing during the pandemic, because with these online discussions you could work at home more or less. There was no travel, nothing else to do, so that was actually a good time to work with these things. But now it's another time, and now it's the time to take, roll up your arms and do some new stuff. Finally.
Perfect. So, my question to you is that, as you have evolved, right from starting companies, being a board member to chairman of the board, are there any things that you initially underappreciated and right now you appreciate those things?
I think, it's important to have some, as a board, you need to have, of course, follow formalities and be able to report in a timely manner to shareholders and communicate with the shareholders. I've always been very keen to communicate with shareholders, whether it's a private company or it's a public company. It's even more important because you have more shareholders. But all the time to be very open in communication. And sometimes that is, some people, they don't really like that. I don't know why. It's maybe you're afraid of your tongue is loose or something like that. I don't know. It's I don't understand it, because if you know the facts and you know what the rules, you could always stay within those boundaries, which are totally acceptable to all parties. But if you are too afraid of going out there and communicate, shareholders will interpret that as if you're withholding information, or that you are actually not doing the stuff you promised them when they invested. So if you don't communicate the progress, what's happening, it might be minute development, but just to say hello, I think is a big difference from being like a muscle and saying nothing. It's just.
So your point, this point actually relates to market efficiency, right? Where if you're hesitant to discuss with markets, then actually it proves that markets are actually not efficient. It's kind of inefficient, right?
It is inefficient, and I think that case one should be. If you decide to be a public company, you absolutely have to decide to communicate and to do that to the best of your abilities. And if you're not good at it, hire somebody else to help you out doing that.
Exactly.
But if you're geared towards, this feels uncomfortable, no, then I think you shouldn't be working, in management or on the boards of such companies.
Exactly. You made a very good point, actually, because and when you made this point about, if you cannot do that, you hire somebody else. I would like to touch upon this concept of decentralization. So I'm always it's not all business, but most of the businesses, especially in biotech, I believe that decentralization works very well, because what you do in decentralization, you hire the best people and delegate. So if, let's say, if there are areas in which you feel challenged, so I think, that could be, easily compensated by, hiring and delegating, right?
Yes.
So,
I mean, you should know basically what you're saying. You should know what you don't know, and then you need to get somebody who can help you out with that. So I think that's a very important distinction.
exactly. So, do you think that, let's talk about skin in the game. What I mean by that is, do you believe that boards should be independent, or you believe that boards should have some stake in the company because that will drive them to work towards moving forward? Or you see that will be a conflict because a small VC might like an early exit, whereas a large VC or a large family business might look for a long-term exit, and there will be a conflict actually.
Yeah,
So what's your opinion? Mhm.
I mean, you have that conflict. I mean, if it's a family business, it's kind of a long term. Many times, there are several
Yeah,
examples of that, and the same is true. And then it's more like a private company. And in some countries you have that. Germany and Switzerland, companies they are listed, but the majority is owned by the family, so it's still like a family owned company. And very little is traded in the stock exchange. So it's a point, should it be listed or not? I think that's a relevant question. And in that case, maybe it would be better to be private. But at some point, they needed capital from, and they became public. And many of these, family members, they deplore the moment they became public all the time. Oh, we should have been private. Even H&M, a Swedish big clothes manufacturer or sales company, they would like to own everything. They don't want to have it public. So they say that at all times. But it's otherwise the same thing is true. If on the board, and I've been sometimes in that position where owning majority of the shares. Of course, it's a different situation if you're listed than if you don't.
correct.
But to own some shares, of course, shows an interest in the company. So it doesn't have to be a controlling position. But otherwise, I think it should be totally free. If you recruit board members for their skills, that's what you should look for. If they decide to join as owners, that's fine. And it's better to be more open in that situation.
Mhm.
I try to tell also shareholders, they get frustrated because they think, oh, you should own a lot of shares in the company. Yes, there are some people who think that's good, and that is good. But the most important is that they are anyhow trying to be independently working and not driven by the kind of wrong motivation for development of the company. They should act in the interest of all shareholders at all times. If you're a public company, you should always think about all shareholders, not just your own shares. You should think about everybody. And of course, it's perhaps, some argue it's easier to think like everybody if you own a lot of shares. But if you own many shares, maybe you don't think like everybody. It might be a different case. So if you own some shares, yes, then you might think like everybody. So, but I think as a chairman or board member, one should never be in doubt as a shareholder that you're not trying to act to the best of your ability to guide this company towards profit or to make a gain for the shareholders, depending what kind of company it is.
Right. So, what do you think about the role of CEO in making a high-performing board? What are the things you think the CEOs should be involved so that the boards perform very well?
It's a very difficult question. It's so personal and also different in different cases. There are so many different examples also. I mean, many who are working on board, they have at least some experience as CEOs of different companies and so on, which is, I think, is a very good experience, but not every board member needs to have that experience. But perhaps if you're going to be chairman, I think you need to have experience of having been a CEO of the company. To be able to support the CEO of the company, it helps a lot to understand what it means to be the CEO of the company. The role of the CEO informing the board, yeah, that depends on how you start out. You know, I have been founding CEO in several companies, and then of course I recruit all the board members. So it's you know, there are different traditions in different countries. You know, in Europe you have more of you're a CEO and then you have a chairman of the board and the other board members. US you could be, you know, president, CEO, and chairman and everything in one person. Yeah. That is interesting, and many times I wished I was that. But would it help me or the company or the board or the shareholders? I don't know. I mean, there are some different models in that case, and I guess also in US companies it takes some time to earn all those titles, and maybe a big stake in the company also helps.
So when I asked you the question, I had a few thoughts in my mind which I wanted to share, in the sense that, so I mean to say, as you said, it's a very difficult question because it's very personal, because every CEO is different. But do you think that broadly the CEO must do a couple of things which are very important to keep the board engaged? What I mean by that is, let's say, for example, keeping, let's say, creating any kind of KPIs for the board, for example, or for example, providing a summary of the strategy going forward. And let's say if the board meeting is 1 month down the line, trying to reach out to board separately, get his points, so that to structure a kind of a strategy document and sharing important things with the board member much ahead. You know, I know the CEOs are busy, and this is what I go back to the point of decentralization. You know, that if you're not able to do that, then that means that you really need people actually to delegate. You know, but you know, broadly speaking, you know, there should be 2 or 3 points which I think CEO must be doing it well to keep the board members engaged and have a very productive board meeting, and make sure that he gets inputs also from the board members. But otherwise, you know, it would be like a inert board, you know, where the board is just coming for a presentation.
And I guess that's the problem when I cited this American style board, where you have very dominating chairman and president and everything, and then many people are just keeping quiet. I know this case, you know, a major US corporation. I won't say which one because I don't want to, you know, pull out anything. But it was, you know, a guy, a Swedish guy, he got, you know, the first call to join this big board on a major corporation. I mean, a worldwide corporation. He was the CEO of a Swedish company, and next thing he learned some months later that they had a second meeting, and he didn't take part in the second meeting. He thought he was part of a board, you know, board of directors. And then he called up the chairman, CEO, and president and whatnot. And this guy told him, you know, I didn't hear you saying anything in the board meeting, so I thought you had nothing to say. So then I excluded you for the next one. And this guy said, you know, yeah, I try to listen and learn. That's a kind of a Swedish approach. You need to, I mean, they want to keep a low profile and not say too much. So then, you know, people who don't say anything on the board meeting, I think they should have no place here. And then he said, yeah, I wanted to listen and learn. Oh boy, seriously, you should reconsider. I have to reconsider your position as CEO of one of our major subsidiaries in our company. So that was kind of a tough message, but very American. versus European approach. How you, I mean, maybe in Europe you think more and I reflect, and maybe then later you go back on this. But in US you have to be upfront and you have to share, you know, front feet in the first meeting. You cannot wait until you don't get a second chance in that case.
Correct.
So one needs to understand. I mean, there's different cultures if you do international business, but you know what is better. What is, you know, I think there are benefits of all those different styles and cultures. Yes.
Correct. So let's say if I discuss with you talent management, and I'm talking about talent management of the employees. Okay. Does that get a very important or prominent, let's say, discussion among the board members in your experience? Because in my personal experience, if or view, a company can have whatever strategy to hire employees. They can hire A's or B's or C's. Okay, but if they hire B's and C's, then it inhibits the growth of the company because um, uh, for the obvious reasons, actually, right? So in that particular aspect, how important is the talent management, you think, board members discuss internally to hire in biotech companies, for example?
I think it's very important that the CEO is, you know, well connected in that area and knows how to tackle that and is actively thinking about the staff of the company. And that's the task of CEO. The task of the board is to think about succession and development of the CEO.
Correct.
That is, you know, one of the important tasks aside from strategy and budget, funding, and so on. But I think one needs to monitor about the CEO if he or she is doing that job in an efficient way, because it is an experience also. And so what if you don't know it? You could let some knowledgeable recruitment firm do the job for you. So that's fine. But you need to know if you know it yourself, or you have contacts enough, or you work through a recruitment firm. But it needs to be in place in some way. So you have a strategy that is taking care of that in time. Because when the time comes and you have a crisis, then it's too late. It might take too much time.
Exactly. So when you talked about the CEO, and if let's say you hire A as the CEO, right? He's going to hire A's in his team. If you hire a B as a CEO, then he's going to hire B's in the team, because what happens is that, you know, B's feel threatened to have A's in their team,
Yes.
which is very, very normal, right? So have you? I mean, I have witnessed personally where many a times the decision is not driven by the idea of meritocracy of the employees. Rather, it is driven by, I would say, nepotism would not be the right word, but maybe I would say that, okay, you know the people, for example, well, which is important, but, you know, just knowing the well is a sufficient condition, you know, is not a sufficient condition. I mean to say the person has to have the ideas, you know, which is very, you know, something very spectacular or very different than to be included in as a team, for example.
I think it's very important that you have guts to hire, you know, top people, even knowing that they might replace you one day, you know.
Correct.
That is guts. And if you don't, I think you shouldn't be the CEO. Then you don't have the guts for the business anyhow. So I think that is an important. Have I seen that? Yes, of course. Many are afraid of being replaced, or they have to build a new house, or a second home on some island, or buy some expensive car and whatnot, you know, and they want to stay in office for longer, or they want to earn the pension funds after life or something like that. I don't know. But, you know, in some ways, those strategies are not long term. I think they are even for whoever you are. You know, it's
Exactly. So, you know, I would just argue that, let's say if the CEO is really threatened about the new employee, I'm just thinking out loud that maybe he is not A, he is B, because if he is A, he will be very solid in some of the areas where the other party may not be able to do that,
Yeah,
but he will.
maybe,
Oh,
I don't want to, kind of categorize in that way. So I think one just needs to think again, as I said, the board needs to think about the shareholders and making the best. I mean,
correct,
whether private, public, you have to work with the shareholders.
correct.
CEO has to work with the business, has to work for, of course, the shareholders, the board, and of course for the employees, the best of the employees and customers. So you have more directions. But what is most important is actually the business that is it's evolving and thriving and developing and thinking,
Exactly.
sometimes thinking longer term. As I said, succession and so on. Why not? If you were made a successful company, I think there's no problem with whatever next job or whatever you want to do. But I don't know. Yes, you see people afraid of this and that, and I say, oh, now why are you doing this? Why do you step down from this job and so? I say, I'm starting 3 new businesses, so I don't have time to work around all these things. And I say, oh, don't you have enough time? I know one guy I work with. He told me I'm on 20 boards. And I knew him well enough, if he listens to this, maybe he will be angry, but I'm not naming. But, when he was on boards I worked on, he got everything in paper. He didn't want only on email or something like that, or electronically. So he got it on paper, sent out in good time. So he opened the envelope in the board meeting. So he never read anything beforehand, even if he got it 2 weeks ahead. He never read it. So open it at the table. So then
Right.
I told him, I understand why you could be on 20 boards. That's
Exactly.
it's no effort. So of course he was never chairman. He was always
Yeah,
member.
got it.
Yeah.
So as you talked about this example, why don't we get into the talent management among boards? So in that context, what do you think is what it makes a good board? A specialist or a generalist, or a mix of both, and when and how?
I think a mix is very good. I mean, you need to come from maybe some different backgrounds. It depends on the company also, development phase, and what you need to. But one mistake many does is to have everybody with the same background.
Correct.
As the CEO.
Exactly.
So the CEO, feels comfortable with everybody went to medical school and whatnot, So they are all talking the same. So it's like a fraternity meeting or something like that.
Yeah.
It's good to be friends, but you need to think sometimes different thoughts and different directions, and also have knowledge of different areas. And if you run into trouble, or it could be business, could be the other things, and I don't say, I mean, some people have a lot of experience about a lot of things, so they might be able to tackle, even if they're professor of medicine or something like that. They might be a super business person, but there are very few around.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it happens. I met some, so I wouldn't say no. But everybody with the same, no. I think to have some legal person, if you don't, it depends on the skills totally on the board. So if you have everything, then you're fine. It could be the chairman, CEO, and president and everything. You're one person on the board, and also the CEO of the company. You know everything. But I think it's always good to be able to have a culture where you can relate to different questions and ask people, and let them be free enough to like to talk about that, not being afraid of talking or anything like that. It should be prohibited in that way.
Exactly. So I mean, so this also brings me some of the examples in some of the companies in Europe, or maybe in Nordics, I would say, I have seen. So when you talked about, let's say, an example of CEO being president, chairman, and very aggressive. On the other hand side, I have seen also opposite, in some of the European companies where board controls the CEO so much that in one of the
You're
companies I have
impressed.
seen that, yeah. So that also is not very healthy, right? I mean, the role of the board, I think, is to keep a check on the CEO, how he performs, and gives a very constructive advice during the board meeting what the strategy of the company should be.
I think so, and I can see that CEOs sometimes think that that is the case, and I might be guilty of that sometimes, But then you're kind of edging into an issue where maybe you change the CEO, or there's no trust. So I mean, if you're going into that situation over a longer time now, that is not good. So I think it's digital. I mean, either you have to declare that you have 100% trust in the CEO, or you don't. I mean, it's not in between. I mean, you really need to say and support the CEO. If you don't, you have to change something. And if it's the CEO or the board, that's of course a discussion. Yeah.
Perfect, super. So I think we have covered a lot on corporate governance, board meetings, and so on. We don't have that much of time, but maybe a couple of questions we can tackle on investing.
Yes, and I'm coming into that now. So I'm sorry for because it's related to the question you had before, and that is sometimes if you have very strong owners who are holding on to their next round of financing. Of course, the CEO wouldn't be criticizing them or
correct.
He would follow their lead to the minute. So that is an issue with perhaps venture capital kind of investing. That is a trouble to get somebody who's very loyal, but is it the best? I'm not so sure. And but let's please continue. Sorry.
No, perfect. No, so I understand that those points that you talked about. I think it's the things that you talked about also leads to these human relations of power. There's what is the power balance actually. So in terms of investing, because I think you have also invested in several companies, and I wanted to get an understanding from you regarding your investing principles. What I mean by that is, so let me start with a very simple example. So I have my also internal bias. We all human beings have bias towards investing, and I look forward to always the Berkshire Hathaway meetings, value investor, their thought process and so on. So one of the large investor is an Indian American named as Mohnish Pabrai. I'm not sure if you heard about him. So he actually, his argument is that he copied all the Warren Buffett's kind of principles of investing and made it from 1 million to 1 billion. Now the question, one question he was asked in an interview was that if you think cloning or copying is so easy, why not everybody, why does not everybody do that actually? So his answer was very interesting. He said, the problem with human beings is that we have so much of ego that we do not want ourselves to copy some of the best principles that other people are actually doing it actually. So, I just share you this narrative, so of course, there are many qualities of which you cannot directly replicate, but on a broad level, there are many things that we can actually learn from successful people and then kind of emulate, right? So going by that, I would like to understand that given you have invested in several companies, what's your investment philosophy? What kind of companies you like to invest? What are the companies you do not like to invest, and so on? And
it's a very interesting example, but I think both him and Warren Buffett would be very special people, even if they put up some principles of investments. It's more to it than that, it's a bit more than that, is why don't everybody start IKEA? You know, it's
Correct.
simple. You're just selling, you know, some mass-produced goods and sell it to a lot of people in magazines and so on. Yeah, some people have done it, but you know, it's more to it than that. And these people are unique, really. So it is. It's not simply done. Why don't everybody do that? You know, it's they make it look simple, but it's
Correct.
really not that simple. So we sorry, I have to just. I'm sorry. So. I think why I do things is because I like it, you know, and I think it's I see some uniqueness. If it's worldwide unique, I don't know, but the people behind is a very important factor. You know, it should be compelling. And now I was talking to this guy in diabetes. And I wanted to invest in diabetes for a long time. I haven't yet, so I'm still out there looking for some really interesting diabetes project. And he said, you know, he was a professor in medicine, and he said, you know, I get a lot of funding for my research from everybody, a lot, because I research in diabetes, but I don't care about, you know, if we can develop any drugs to treat diabetic patients. And then I said, you know, thank you for that revelation or early on. So I didn't have to invest in this or spend time because I would never work with those, you know, that kind of interest from you. I would like somebody who is actually burning to do make a difference in that area, whatever it is. And that is the difference. So the people, that is super important. So you have the right people. Well, I would be happy if you have the right people also on the management side. That's something. But you know, at least on the research side, you can make sure you have the right people behind and why they do that, and the passion, and also the understanding of their place in the entire society and so on. So if you have that, at least you have a good starting point. That said, you know, I've been investing in very early stage projects where most people stay away, and of course that is a lot of risk, but it's also rewarding. And yes, you have to be active in several projects maybe to be successful in the end, because many do fail, whatever best outset where the best, you know, background might be. And it's difficult to fund it, to develop it, and you might run into different obstacles. But most important is people and, you know, good science, whatever area it is, if it's biotech or could be something else as well.
Perfect. So I think that resonates with this argument that, you know, you have to be contrarian and be right, you know, if you are investing in projects which, you know.
I was in 2008, I was having a talk at the bioequity meeting in Munich, and I was talking about immuno-oncology. And I think there were some 300 fund managers there from venture capital community. Nobody was interested. They thought it was crap.
So,
you know, some years later, of course, it was a different picture, and suddenly it was too early for all of those guys. Everybody at that time wanted to invest in platform technologies. And my question to them was, I mean, 300 platforms, come on, you know. Who will buy all of those platforms? Who are the customers? There is no way you will be successful. Many of you will die out. I mean, that was the situation. So many of you, I think in the investment community, they're running in the same area, or they want to stay in some areas because it's fashionable. And, you know, on the other hand, several of them, they're excellent, you know, very knowledgeable people. They might be medical doctors, scientists, and very successful sometimes with the investments, and sometimes not. You know, in times of hard times like now, or in 2008 when we had the Lehman Brothers crash, that was a bit tougher times to raise capital. Yeah.
So do you think that, you know, as you are an independent investor, independent investors have that flexibility to be contrarian much easier than if you are a fund manager, because if you are a fund manager or like a VC,
Yeah.
if you are contrarian, if you're wrong, you're fired actually.
Yeah, yes.
See?
And that happens also. But I also, I've met several who are, they're just great, I mean, and I remember one conversation over lunch in Monte Carlo, of all places, and this, from a great corporate fund. He was the head of that corporate fund. He was asked, "How do you invest?" "I invest with my gut." He was confident enough, even if he was in a corporate venture fund, he dared to say something like that, and that was actually what he did. So
perfect.
I think they did well also. So
super. So, Bert, it has been a pleasure talking to you. I think this podcast had been kind of very interesting.